let's start by just introducing myself and telling you why I thought this might be a good idea. So I'm actually neither a chef nor a professional cook of any sort. I am a mum of two, and I have had a very illustrious career in the corporate world for just over 18 years. And 10 years ago, I decided that it was really upsetting me that people had a really bad view of Indian food, that, it's really complicated, it's really difficult to do, that, the spices are a bit of a minefield and the food's quite unhealthy. So I had started teaching myself how to cook Indian food because, of course, in India, I grew up there and I wasn't allowed into the kitchen. My mum had a cook, the cook had an assistant. I came to England for my university degrees. I didn't even know how to boil an egg, so I was teaching myself all this food. And what I was realizing is that actually when you know what you're doing, it's very easy to cook Indian food on a daily basis and also have a busy career and do all the kind of regular normal stuff. So I started writing a food blog, and that very quickly led to my first book, which is called Miss Masala. Hello, Hattie. Welcome. Someone pour Hattie some lassi, please. Por favor. There you go. Glasses. Thank you. And then about 3.5 years ago, I was managing director at a very big global PR consultancy. So I ran a huge team, and I just had this epiphany. I said, you know what, my kids are 3 and 5, and this is a real passion. I'm 36, I was 36 back then, I have aged since. But I said, I can still do this job in the corporate world 10 years from now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and be the next Mother Jaffrey. Don't quote that, don't repeat that. But I'm basically going to tell people how Indians are cooking Indian food today and how housewives do it, because we do it every day. I don't cook Indian food every day. I don't even cook every day, frankly. But when I do, it has to be done within a certain time frame, in a certain way. It's feeding people, so there's lots of tips and techniques that my counterparts in India use that I've had to learn and use myself. So I've just published my second cookbook. It is Bloomsbury's first Indian cookbook. So they've never published an Indian author before in the main Bloomsbury stable. And he, basically the cookery editor there, who of course you know well, Richard, he said that he was really intrigued by this whole idea that you can cook Indian food in a way that is in sync with modern lifestyles. So lots of easy cheats, lots of kind of tips and tricks and shortcuts, but also clever ways to use up leftover veg and that sort of thing. So when the book was about to come out, I got in touch with Hattie, and she suggested that a store cupboard essential would be quite useful, because that's almost a starter knowledge, right? And it takes you years to break down just that initial barrier, because before you even get onto the spices, you've got the oils, you've got the pulses, or the lentils, you've got the grains, you've got the flours. And I'm not mad keen on clean eating, but the one brilliant thing about clean eating is that it's made a whole range of our ingredients really popular and really easy to get hold of. So where I consult now, so I don't work full time in the corporate world anymore, but my office is actually really close to the Whole Foods in Piccadilly Circus. Of course, it's like a blooming mecca to Indian ingredients because, everyone's on their coconut and coconut oil and the turmeric and, even quite difficult to source ingredients like coconut vinegar. I will go in and I'll buy at just the Whole Foods, and of course everything's online as well. So I thought I'd kickstart by telling you what we're eating. So Indians have chilies in summer to keep the heat down. We also have a lot of yogurt, and I told you before, some of you are right, that yogurt has a protein called casein, which actually kills the heat receptors that are set off when you eat chilies. So you eat chilies, your body lets off all this pain, which is why you feel like you're in agony. Yogurt has a substance in it called casein that actually dissolves the protein, basically, of that chilies let off. So it's an instant coolant. So raita is something which is a savory yogurt dip almost, and it's something we have almost every day religiously. There's like a daily raita in the house, and it depends on where you are, but yogurt features prominently alongside the main course, very prominently around India. Now, I grew up in Calcutta, so my family are quite peculiar in that my mother's from Delhi, my grandmother, and so her family are all originally Afghani. So there's a lot of Northwest influence, but they settled as agricultural nomads. So their food is very heavy in vegetarian things. So they eat a lot of vegetarian food, they consume a lot of dairy, And the food's very simple. It's kind of peasant food basically. And they have meat and fish when they're special occasions. Partly because obviously back in the good old days, even like in Britain, meat was expensive. It wasn't something you didn't have big quantities of meat. So it's a very similar culture. But then she was born in Calcutta, which is Bengal. And she got married into my dad's family. And my grandfather's he used to be a communist leader, so a very kind of high profile, well-known family. And they're all Bengali. Now Bengalis are famous fish eaters. They're really well known for it. Their style of cooking is very, very different. So already I was growing up in a household where there were different food influences. And because my parents were such big food lovers, wherever they went, they brought influences back. So we were cooking South Indian food at home. My father went for university, aborted medical degree, don't quote that either, in Kashmir. So he brought back Kashmiri spices, So normally in India, what you'll have a culture, and they'll cook the food of their family and their community at home. And then they go outside to eat other food of other cultures or to their friends' houses. Whereas in my house, it was all kind of, you'd have a sambar dal, which is South Indian, with fried fish, which was Bengali, with, like chickpea curry, which was North Indian. It was all a bit of a mishmash. So my food very much represents that. And it's all about, the two things is how the macronutrients match. So you have lentil with protein, with, carbs, with veg, with greens. But also for me, very importantly, it's color. Because you start eating before you actually eat, right? The eyes and how it all looks. And unfortunately, Indian food gets, it gets tainted by this whole oil slick stuff that you see in restaurants, but it's not how we eat at home. So hopefully today you'll be able to see a bit of, when you go to someone's house to eat in India, there's a lot of food. There's a lot of color, there's a lot of variety, there's a lot of chili levels, so something will be spicy, something will be completely muted, and you mix and match. And interestingly, there was a massive scientific study done recently about what makes Indian food so spectacular. And why do people love it so much? And what they found is that normally in the West, when we think about how food tastes good, you think about complementary flavors. Okay, so that's how we pull flavors together. Generally in cuisines, very generally. In India, we clash flavors. So you bring things that are completely opposite and you push them together, and then it creates this absolute magic in your mouth. So that is sort of the enduring appeal, and it's now scientifically proven. So I'm obviously on the trail to publicize my book, so please feel free to take photos, and whatever you like of the food, and quote me, happy for you to do social media, everything, and yeah, just tag me, so if when I pick it up I can share it as well, because I think people would find it interesting too. Yeah.
What's your handle?
So it's at Mallika, capital MALLIKA, and then the surname BASU and _ and that's both on Twitter and on Instagram. Yeah. And I said earlier, this is all really informal, it's discursive. I'm going to get you to do stuff. We all get stuck in Indian family, Indian home. So any questions you have, just ask as we go along. I'll do my best to answer it. If I don't know the answer, I'll come back to you. So good. So we're going to start by actually not talking about spices. We're going to start by doing lentils, because we have to eat lunch in 40 minutes. There's a tight schedule to get through. So we're going to kickstart with pulses and lentils. So I need someone to volunteer to wash up some lentils for me. Who's in the market for lentil washing? And then I'll do the sink. So there's the sink.
Okay.
There where the sink is. So we need 4 cups of lentils.
Okay.
And you're going to wash it under the cold tap, so that's cold because the girl has washed it up. And we're going to wash it, and then I'll talk to you about lentils while that's happening. Yes. Scissors. So
4 cups.
So 4 cups, yes please, thank you. And then if you need it, that's the spray, that's the spray.
Oh right.
If you need it, the top one. So lentils. We eat a lot of lentils in India. It's quite a staple, and they feature in very many forms. So dal is obviously the most popular lentil you hear of. People often think dal is soup. It's actually not a soup. It's not meant to be drunk. It's a curry. So you temper dal with spices or ingredients, and you can have a dal that is just boiled lentils with the tempering, but also there are one pot dals where you shove everything in and boil it up and you get like a curry basically. Lentils are also used extensively in pancakes, crepes, snacks, so tea time treats. We enjoy them at breakfast. And so there's lots of different ways to eat lentils. Now, there's obviously this big vegan trend, you know, and lots of people are looking at lentils for their protein content. Thank you very much for doing that, by the way. For their protein content, but you know, the way we eat lentils is all very scientific. So we eat it every day, you know, it's high in iron. So there's kind of like a logic to why a vastly vegetarian and vegan nation like India would consume a lot of lentils. It makes sense, right? Now, lentils, the things you need to know is there are lots of different kinds of lentils, but lentils have something called phytates in them. I don't know if you've come across that before. Phytates are basically different forms of phytic acid.
Which produces the flatulence?
Which produces the flatulence. It is, now, we're going to wash this. The reason we're washing this is because we're taking the dust off it, right? Red lentils don't have a lot of phytates, so you don't have to wash and soak them. But the lentils that do, the ones that are harder to cook, as a general rule, the lentils that take longer to cook have more phytates in them, as a very general rule. But phytates essentially are almost like toxic for, it's the lentil's natural defense mechanism against predators. Now, you know, boiling and cooking it gets rid of a lot of phytates, so you don't have to be terrified about it. It's not arsenic, you know, but it is worth washing lentils before using them just to clear off any surface phytates. And when a recipe says soak, you absolutely have to soak it. And what that does is soaking the lentils part digests them. So, you know, this whole concept of germinating pulses, we use a lot of germinated, so sprouts in our cooking, in our food. We often soak lentils, so that's the sort of stuff that gets rid of the phytates and makes it easy to digest. So when people say to me that, oh, I don't eat lentils because it causes flatulence, I laugh a bit, because the way Indians cook lentils, you shouldn't be getting flatulence at all. Now, thinking that dal is actually a curry, all we're going to do is we're going to bubble that up in cold water, and then, as with most cooking, we don't add cold water to cooking because it slows things down. So Indian food and cookery relies on heat. You need to have things bubbling, and you know, I put some expletives in my first book that I promised Bloomsbury I wouldn't do with my second one, but it was sort of like, you don't make love to it, you fuck it. You know? Indian food is about just getting in there, just viciously stirring. So, but it was the quickest way I could describe it to my sister, who was very kind of slow and methodical. I'm like, just get rid of it, literally. So yeah, I didn't put that in my second book. I didn't think Bloomsbury were quite the sort. But now you know. So we'll get the hot water going, and all we're going to do with that then is just stick it in a big pan. Normally you'd put a drop of oil and some turmeric, but what tends to happen is, as this boils, it's going to let off foam and scum, and you're going to actually take that off. You're going to skim that off and discard it. Now, if you put turmeric and oil at the outset, what you're doing is you're essentially then tossing away the turmeric. So although you're taught, my mum taught me mix in the turmeric and the oil at the outset and then skim it off, I've just ignored her basically. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make logical sense.
At your peril.
At my peril, I know. So my mum was a terrible cook actually when I was growing up. So she's an actress. She defies all stereotypes of Indian mums. She's very glamorous. And she has an incredibly busy life. I probably get it from her, to be honest. But she always knew all the theories of recipes, but she never really cooked when we were growing up. So she'd go and tell the cook what to do. And so, like, you know, she was a fantastic person. Once we moved out of home, she did a brilliant job of kind of giving us the recipes and then getting back into the kitchen. But when we were growing up, I don't actually have many memories of her cooking and stuff. So this, you can see that it's still quite dusty. You know when this is done, when the water runs clear. Okay. Now I didn't tell you that, so it's not the
I normally do it in the water. So.
Yes. So it's easier in the water, but the other way to do it that's really useful is you pop your lentils in here and you can actually check the water underneath to see if it's coming out clear. That's the other way to do it. So there's two mechanisms, but we're very nearly there with this. So we'll stick the lentils on. Now, in terms of the lentils, the ones that are quickest to cook are red lentils and yellow lentils. So that's your masoor is red lentil, and moong, M-O-O-N-G, is your yellow lentils. Now, just to be extra annoying and complicated, lentils are sometimes used with their husks or their skins, sometimes without. So you'll find words like huskless, skinless. So you just have to initially follow the recipe until you know what you're doing. So I've got lentils used in two ways today. One is for the dosa, and I'm going to show you how to swirl that. And then we're turning it into a dal as well. So you can see how the batter works. The ones that take longer are things like pigeon peas, Bengal gram, which is chana lentils. Those are things that just take a little bit longer and are more like they just, you have to soak them sometimes overnight. It just takes a little bit longer. Interestingly, Bengal gram, so when you think of gram flour, everyone calls it chickpea flour, right? So you know it's not chickpeas. So it's actually not chickpeas, it's brown chickpeas. So garbanzo beans are the chickpeas you're thinking of, but gram flour is actually short for brown chickpea flour. People lose the brown, and they think it's just regular chickpea flour. Brown chickpeas are actually, the skin comes off, they're roasted and then powdered, right? They're a lot harder to digest. So lots of people in India, when they have them, they have it with digestive aids like we call it ajwain, carom seeds, I think is the English word for it. So we have it with carom seeds, which are a natural digestive. We have it with asafoetida, and I'll take you through the spices later. But like in the West, everyone's cottoned onto gram flour being gluten-free, and they just willy-nilly substituting it. It's actually quite tough on your tummy.
Yeah.
You're having lentil flour, right?
I discovered that when I put it into bread to try and increase the protein content.
That's
make
right.
the GI lower or something.
Yeah.
And it's really indigestible.
Very indigestible. And that is proper flatulence territory.
Yes.
I mean, without wishing to drop it a notch. But people don't realize that. So we'll often whisk gram flour with yogurt. We'll have it with the spices I mentioned. We often, with lentils, we ferment them before having them. So I'll talk about fermentation later, but these are all, scientifically, you actually break down or partially digest the lentil before you cook with it and enjoy it, which I don't think a lot of people are aware of, basically. So we're going to get this on the boil, sort of done. So you don't have to be too, because you're going to skim it off, right? So you don't have to be too worried about this. So let's get. Now the way to cook lentils is to not top them with too much water, okay? Because you're turning it. Remember, it's a curry, not a soup. So you have just a slim layer, about a couple of centimeters on top of the dal, and then you set it to boil. And what we'll do is every time it looks like it's drying out, we'll add some hot water. So no cold water, because that'll slow things down. And so that'll just bubble away while we're getting on with stuff. Next on my list is actually spices. So we'll go through spices now. So, Hattie, have you had a drink? Would anyone else like a little top up while we continue? Yeah. Here, shall I pass this around and then there you go. I'll hand it over to you, shall I?
Yeah, thank you.
There you go, not at all. So spices. So any questions on lentils before we move on? Is there anything else you'd like to know about lentils or how we cook them or?
I think the age, I sometimes wonder where I'm buying my lentils from. Will they be older? Where do you buy yours from?
Indian shops are very interesting because we don't go to different stores for different things. So you have a grocery store and it sells everything. So I usually buy my ingredients in not massive quantities. So although the bigger sacks and packs, like things like rice, I'll buy like massive 10 kg sacks of. But lentils, I try not to buy more than 2 kilos. And my big tip for Indian ingredients is don't buy huge quantities. Spices especially, lentils, you don't have to worry too much. There's a sell-by date on it, I'll loosely write it down when I transfer them into my Tupperwares, or my storage containers, but I go through them way before they're actually out of date, so you don't have to worry too much about it. And with brands, I'm really agnostic about brands because essentially these things are sold as commodities, right? Like Natco, and again this is like between this group, but Natco, Foodco, Raja, they're commodity products. They probably come from the same wholesale suppliers, but there's no perceived difference as such between the various things. So feel free to go into a ethnic store or online and just buy a bag of red lentils. It's not going to affect the quality or the result of your cookery very much. The spices, I have a similar approach. Now, with spices, so this is my spice cupboard, and I thought long and hard about whether I should organize this. And I thought, you know what, I'm not going to. You can see, you see what it looks like, and it's really not that impressive. I'm sorry. There are little containers that are waiting to be refilled, but I can broadly take you through the system, the method to this madness. I had 52 spices at last count. Okay, 52. But that's not just Indian spices. I also cook, my husband's half Peruvian, half English. We cook a lot of Middle Eastern food, we cook Chinese, so there's a ton of stuff in here. Now, the method to the madness is I'll get kind of this sort of size pack normally, right? This or maybe a little bit bigger. So bearing in mind that I cook a lot, right? So that's the kind of size I'll buy. I would not recommend it for you. For you, I'd go with something like 50 to 75 grams, okay? Mainly because spices get their taste and flavor from the essential oils that are in them. You know that, of course. And actually, you're better off using a small supply before you trade up. Saying that, you never ever throw away spices. You can warm them up really quickly, and that just gives them a burst of flavor, and just use them. So stick the date on them. My rule, absolute golden rule for spice management is I don't buy a new spice until I've used a spice up. So, there's like a real one in, one out policy, because what I find is, there'll be a recipe, it'll say in it, like buy some random spice, and then you'll never use it again, it festers, and, I'm basically a wannabe housewife, so, I'm not into stuff like that. I like everything. So even in my book, I did this rule where I said that every spice can be used in at least 2 recipes. So when you look in the back of the book, you can find, if you've used it, you can see something else that then you can also stick it into, which I think is it's sensible. It's good practice, basically.
So can we turn a light on so we can get pictures of you? Is it possible to turn those on?
Yes, of course it is.
You're kind of silhouetted.
Oh, really? Okay.
It would be great if we can see you as well. It's all your lovely.
Is that
that's
better?
Fantastic.
Yeah? Okay, there you go. Let me put the branded salt away, maybe.
Much better.
Is it? Oh, good.
Now we can get you as well.
Great. Now, so that's the first thing. The first tip is how you buy the spices, and then the storage is the next thing I was going to tell you about. Traditionally in India, we use something called a masala dabba. Has anyone seen them?
I think so.
Yeah.
Stainless steel.
Exactly. You have a stainless steel container, and it's got little pots in it. Now, completely out of sync with our lives. I'll tell you why. It doesn't go in the bloody dishwasher. It's epically difficult to get grease out of stainless steel. You have to really scrub it, and then it gets scratched because you're using these scourers and things. And also in India, the reason we use those things is because basically, as I said before, you cook the food of your family and your community. You're talking about 10 spices. You get 2 masala dabbas, right? Except for all of us, we're cooking Thai food one day, we're cooking Chinese. So how many of these things are you going to get that don't stack up? They don't sit one on top of the other. They get dirty really quickly. So I'm really not a fan of those things. I think, there's a time and a place for them. They're a little bit out of sync with the way we live and the kind of cooking we do, including me, and I'm like a regular Indian cook. So what I do is I transfer those, like the big spices, into these massive jars to keep them airtight. I've got loads of extra. I also get given a lot of spices. So this is not usual for most people. So I store that in the top, and then I transfer them into these massive things, and then they go into here. So actually I only ever access this bit. Yeah. And then this is all my big, I can see when my supplies are dwindling very easily. And then I just top them up. So I'll often like do transfers, and so it goes from top to
Yeah.
and then it feels like a manageable mechanism. I'm not saying you replicate this, but it's quite nice to have smaller quantities of it, easy to manage and store. If you buy your spices in a supermarket, you're likely to have the small jars. Again, I don't buy those because they store laterally, and it's the worst use of space. What you want is stuff that stores like that. Do you see what I mean? You want stackable lids. So these are brilliant because they just sit one on top of the other, and I have a million of these. You see, because then you're using vertical storage, which is how we live, basically.
So if you bought those empty,
Yes.
where did you get those from?
So these are just available. I just bought them on Amazon. But I find this a really good way. I mean, you'll notice that I don't put sell-by dates on them because I just go through them, way before they're likely to sell by. But you could just stick, and what happens then is you can see very clearly, one on top of the other, what the sell-by dates are.
Are they as airtight as the glass?
They what, sorry?
Are they as airtight as the glass?
Yes, so they're like that.
Oh,
Yeah, they're really clever. And yeah, I mean that I would say is the best form of storage. But because there's a double mechanism, I tend to just have my regular spices in these little glass jars, basically. But there isn't a perfect way. There isn't like one foolproof fail-safe way. This is just how I do it. This has a special bottle. So you'll see that I do another thing that's very Indian is we don't throw anything out. So every jar, every possible storage container of any description then gets washed and dried and reused. So I have a cross section of Nutella jars and coffee jars that then get put to use, and I have a whole selection of them up there as well. But just feel free. It needs to be airtight. No double dipping, no wet spoons, all the kind of usual spice management stuff. Now, how the spices are used is what. Any other questions on buying or storing spices before I go on to how they're used?
What do you think, the quality of supermarket spices, how do you think they compare to ones you buy in a mixed?
So again, supermarket spices are sold quite generically, so I wouldn't buy them for quality, I just buy them for convenience because it's easier to pop by a supermarket than doing an online order or but I just find them wasteful. I don't think there's enough, it's 35 grams for quite a lot of money. I don't think the storage is fit for purpose. They're just being sold as commodities, and not very economical or value for money commodities. So for someone like me who cooks quite often, I just don't see them as being, very good sort of cost versus purpose.
Rupa Gulati, who I think is still a member of the Guild, she said that the cumin seeds that you buy at Sainsbury's had already been toasted, so that when you opened it had that nice smell, but actually they shouldn't have been already
They shouldn't have been toasted. It's really bad because then they
point.
degenerate quicker, but also toasted cumin seeds have a completely different flavor profile. So we toast cumin seeds to basically create this earthy flavor that's great with raita, with certain dishes. It's a totally different flavor profile from regular cumin, so that would bother me.
Yeah.
But I've obviously never purchased supermarket cumin. I haven't noticed.
And she pointed that out and I thought, that's interesting.
Yeah, and also I've just noticed because of the book shoot, I ended up with lots of higgledy-piggledy because I took everything back. I was like, oh, don't throw anything. Hello. How's that then? No idea. Something's fallen but not broken yet. These mustard seeds, which were used at my book shoot, are bigger and thicker than the mustard seeds I buy. And so that would be, you would feel them more in your mouth. So I wouldn't use those unless I had to grind or powder them. Little things like that. And we don't make it easy for ourselves. So I often find these things have different names online. Or you go into a shop. Now, mustard seeds, you get brown and yellow. So yellow mustard seeds are actually a fermentation aid. We use them in pickling. And we turn them into mustard paste, basically. But these are used more for cooking, for tempering, for cooking. And so like all these things have different uses. It's not so like, you can't just replace them like for like, essentially. Anything else on kind of buying spices or?
What about the storage?
see-through jars, do you prefer that it should be dark so that the light's not getting in, or?
I don't, because it's such small quantities, I don't really mind so much about the see-through, and also with all of those. Yeah, it's in a cupboard, you know, and again, for me, because I go through them so quickly, you won't be buying massive jars of Indian spices. You'll only have those tiny things, and you probably use them up within a year, so it's fine, really.
I've just remembered my next question. Things like sesame seeds, because they contain fat in them, I store in my fridge, but of course my fridge is absolutely... Because the fat can go rancid in seeds.
It can, it really
But you know,
can.
you end up with your fridge absolutely so choppy, you can't kind of daily...
No, so I don't stick my sesame seeds in the fridge, even though that is true. It's just because I'd rather buy a smaller quantity, buy a smaller quantity and just use them.
More fridge space.
Yeah, I just think...
Have 2 fridges.
Because you can go a bit crazy, can't you, with like trying to find
everything
space.
now says keep in the fridge. You know,
I know, right. Exactly. Sorry, I'm just going to give this a quick stir. If anyone wants to volunteer stirring this, we need to make sure we eat at a reasonable hour. So everything's ready. Would you mind? Would you like an apron, because your dress is rather lovely, and I feel a little bit sorry for.
Same colour,
So all you have to do, that's steak.
Get it from the bottom.
Everyone eats steak, yes, because otherwise you're a bit in trouble. Yeah. So let me give you an apron. And then I need someone to keep a light eye on the dal. So every time it dries out, it's okay for the moment. Every time it dries out, you need to just add a bit of hot water to it.
I'm encouraged by the woks that you are using. I know that purists often say they must be thin, pressed steel, and round bottom and sitting in a rack. Those are practical.
So I'm all about the practical, I'm afraid. I don't have a lot of time or headspace. I'm going grey very prematurely. So I'm afraid there's a lot of stuff in here that actually strays.
A saucepan.
It is a wok, actually.
No.
It's a commercial wok.
Yes, I know. That's what Ken Holm would call a wok.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's
not a wok. It's not a Chinatown wok. No, it's not. But then I don't need carbon steel in this house.
You have carbon steel. It's the roundness at the bottom,
yes,
which
I know.
concentrates the heat.
You prefer a wok on the wild side.
Give it a bit of time. Yeah, it's just warming up now anyway. I'm going to turn this on too. That's
Sorry, I keep moving it thinking it's mine, and then
warm up the thing. But you're right. I mean, so a lot of the things you'll notice that I'm not using iron tawas and stuff like that, because the reality is I'm cooking for the family.
You don't need a wok for that dish.
No.
You just need a big saucepan, which is what they did.
That's exactly right, and that's exactly why I used
You
it.
haven't violated
Because it's big.
No, and do you know what? I'm all for violating rules. I think rules are made to be broken.
Data Chung, the great purist, if you've ever been in his kitchen, the walls are black and the ceiling. Everything is cooked at supernal temperatures.
Yes, but yes, there is a bit of stepping away from tradition, and unfortunately that's just what I do, and I love to share those tips because I think sometimes people can overcomplicate things that don't need to be overcomplicated. But I was going to tell you, so spices. So we've talked a little bit about how you buy them, how you store them. I'd like to tell you how we use them, right? Broadly, you have 3 ways in which we use spices. You have whole spices, you have ground spices, and then you have your spice blends, right? Now, some spice blends are, I'll start from the beginning. The whole spices are usually used in hot oil to kickstart a recipe. So again, I'm very much generalizing, but these are broad things to be aware of. Now, when whole spices hit hot oil, they cook really quickly. All you have to do is wait for them to sizzle. They sizzle and you're pretty much done. So that kickstarts tempering, for instance. Kickstarts a lot of South Indian recipes. So, in South India, they love mustard seed, curry leaf, then shallots, ginger, garlic go in. And this is, again, broadly generalizing. In Bengal, where I'm from, we have something called a 5-spice mix. It's called Panch Phoron, Panch. and then Phoron is spelled P-H-O-R-O-N, and it's a ready mix of 5 spices, and that is used as a base for lots of fish curries, lots of veg dishes. So ginger, that 5 spice mix, and green chilies are often the starting point of a lot of recipes. Now, my first nanny, who was with us for 4 years, and we've kind of adopted her now, she's from Gujarat in the West. And one day I came home from work and I'd asked her to make pasta for the kids. And she started it. Is that somebody very late? Thank you, Hattie. She started the recipe with a tempering. This is pasta, mind you, with a tempering of curry leaves, cumin seeds, mustard seeds, and asafoetida. And I was like, why did you put these things in a pasta? And she said, Mallika, the starting point of every recipe is with these spices. I thought, oh my goodness, I want to slip my wrist. But in Gujarat, there is this, hello, hi. Not at all. Come and join the fun. You haven't missed lunch, so that's good.
Well, that's the main thing. I'm Sudi.
Hi, Sudi. There you go. And please have loads. But the point I'm trying to make is that every culture, every region of India has a starter spice, right? That sets up, and whole spices are used like that, yes? Whole spices, of course, are also roasted and ground. Now, there is this wonderful romance, and actually I've written a piece for George Osborne, which is in the Evening Standard today. If you grab a copy, do please. But there's this wonderful romantic notion about individual spices being roasted to the perfect timing, and then pulverized in a pestle and mortar, like one by one, and then you put them together to make spice mixes. And it's completely out of date, because essentially in the olden days you'd use a pestle and mortar, or you'd use a stone grinder to do it, whereas actually, of course, you could just use a little coffee grinder. And it doesn't matter if your spices are at different varying levels of crispness, as long as they're warm and they've toasted and they've let out their flavor, you can just bash them. Yeah, so that's how whole spices are also used. Now, you don't need to toast and grind your spices for every recipe. Okay, that just does not happen anymore. People very happily in India, they buy their spices. You're buying small quantities of it. It's fairly fresh. You just use them. Now, some families are particular. Like there's a combination called dhana jeeru, and that's coriander cumin. And it's the 2 powders together in a very specific quantity that's used in Gujarati cooking. So families often have it mixed. Now, they do that in Delhi, they do that in Gujarat. My Bengali families, they hate it. They're like, how can you put cumin and coriander together? That's just ridiculous. Those are 2 ingredients. Dhana jeeru, D-H-A-N-A, and jeeru, and that's Gujarati for coriander cumin.
Oh, okay.
But then even...
Speaking of purity,
yes,
Valentina Harris.
Yes, we'll add
Valentina Harris once did a lengthy demonstration on how to do a risotto properly, and at the end she said, "Of course, Italian, but the housewives do it in the microwave."
Yeah, yeah. There's a great, actually on BBC Good Food, there's a great recipe for a baked risotto that I use a lot. Just shove it in the oven and you're off you go. I wouldn't tell any Italians that, with apologies to anyone with Italian genes, but you do what you have to. So in India, the one spice mix that's definitely made, and every family has a different recipe, is garam masala. So garam means hot, and masala is, as per my book, it's a mix of spices, basically, and what that does is adds warmth and heat, but not chili, just essentially temperature, and bitterness to dishes. So you'll often find garam masala being used with tomato-based dishes, so it cuts the tang of the tomatoes. And we never put garam masala at the start of a recipe unless the recipe particularly calls for it. So I often get queries by email saying, I don't know what happened, I put my garam masala at the beginning and the dish was bitter. And I'm like, basically you just added a whole load of really bitter spices to your dish too early, and then they've cooked even more. Bearing in mind, garam masala, the ingredients are toasted first before grinding. So already they're cooked, then you cook them more, they're warm, they're bitter spices. So add at the end, very sparingly, follow the recipe, most important thing. Parsi cooking, which is the Zoroastrian community of India, they are very interesting. They often use garam masala earlier. but that's because their dishes are sweet and sour and tangy. So it makes perfect sense. You know, so you get the bitter, you get the astringent early on, so everything balances out by the time you're done with it. But you know, there is a real sensitivity to how you do that. Another ingredient we use at the end is amchur, which is mango powder. Well, mainly because it's so subtle, you know, you don't want to kill the taste of raw mango too early, but that's another ingredient we put right at the end. Lemon juice is another thing sprinkled at the end, fresh herbs of course as per usual. So that's then your spice blends. Then you have your powdered spices. There is absolutely no shame in using ready powdered spices. Some of you are standing, by the way, please feel free to grab chairs or perch on the sofa. I feel sorry for you, there's quite a lot of talking. Thank you for this, by the way. Well done.
Responsibility.
Yeah, I know, right? Gosh, don't mess it up, dear. Now I'm checking.
I knew there was a point.
So the thing about ground spices is it's fine to buy them and use them, not a problem at all. What you've got to remember is that with Indian food, you know, you're using so many spices usually. Even if it's a very simple dish, you're using 3 or 4 spices, right? So you're using so many that actually they don't have to be freshly ground and powdered. You know, they're packing enough of a punch anyway. And then to those spices, you're adding things like tomatoes, yogurt, you know, onions. So you've got quite a lot going on in your pan. So, you know, there's a bit of snobbery about this stuff, which
So
I think...
Because I don't tell Delia all this, it's possibly absolutely, you know. But then when she was writing, there wasn't so much available as there is now.
There isn't. And you know, unfortunately, since Delia, since Madhur Jaffrey, we've really changed. You know, our lives have changed. And for people to continue to create interesting exotic flavors in their homes, if you want to cook Indian food in your house every day, you have to do what Indian housewives do. And I traveled extensively around India. I obviously grew up in India and I've only lived here since my university days, which to be fair is quite a while now. But the reality is that when I went and I saw how these housewives were cooking, it was fascinating. They have ready pureed ginger garlic paste. They make a batch of it at the start of the week. It's ready to go. They've got their garam masala going. You know, it's bish bash posh. You know, onions are ready sliced in the fridge. They take it out, they put it in. And when you're cooking, now the other thing about Indian food is we don't have one dish with rice. That's not how we eat normally. I do, because I don't have time to cook very much more than that usually. But the way we cook is, the thali is the way we cook. You've got rice, you've got roti, you've got papad or papadum, and then you've got all these dishes. So on a regular basis, you're making 3 to 4 dishes per meal. And that's after you've cooked a full breakfast. You know, now even if your cook is doing that, say you've got domestic help and stuff, you're still having to oversee the stuff. You know, you're not just outsourcing it and walking off, you're still having to keep a gentle eye on it. So it's massive. I mean, when I was growing up, we were 3 sisters. I hated fish, my sisters loved fish. My grandmother often stayed with us, who was vegetarian, because she became a widow quite early on in her life and then she gave up meat. We had 2 dogs.
Is that common to give up meat?
Very common, because meat by Ayurveda is seen to be heat and passion producing.
Yeah.
So you give up meat and you wear white, so you don't incite yourself.
Every day.
Yeah, it's quite sad. I know, right? Terrifying. You know, the point is that it's quite. So there was all this different food being produced. So when you cook like that, you know, you think that the way to do it, the way to make this easy and bearable, is to reach for all those shortcuts and things. So that's your ground spices. Now, in terms of ground spices, there's obviously loads you can get, but the very basic ones, of course, you know, turmeric, chili powder, coriander and cumin, and I would say garam masala. With those 5 things, you can do so much damage, right? Like literally, there's a lot of recipes you can cover off with those 5 ground spices.
What were the 5 again?
So I would say turmeric, chili powder, coriander, cumin. There was one more, garam masala. Yes.
Have you talked about using fresh turmeric?
I haven't yet. I'll come on to that in a minute. So I always have fresh turmeric in the fridge, actually. So the where was I? I've lost my train of thought. Sorry. So with those 5 spices, you can do a lot of magic. You can then build out from that, where you buy the whole spices you need for a garam masala. Yes, and they become your whole spices that you use for tempering and to kickstart recipes. But then you can grind them yourself and make garam masala to your own recipe. So you see how the complexity then, so I started cooking with the ready powdered, then I went into the tempering spices for dal, then I started grinding those spices to make my own garam masala. Now once you gain confidence with that and say then you reach a recipe or you find a recipe that maybe has another interesting ingredient in the mix, you might buy that. But I would say you can do a lot with about 15 spices. Yeah, and bearing in mind that a lot of these spices are what Ottolenghi uses. You know, he's often going in for the coriander, for the cumin, so they have a lot of uses. You know, Middle Eastern cookery, for instance. So they have a lot of uses. Some of the interesting spices I wanted to talk about are this one. This is asafoetida or hing. You've heard, some of you have heard about it. It's also called devil's dung. It's a resin. It's actually a gum that comes out of a tree that's dried and powdered. It stinks.
Devil's gum or
Devil's dung.
I thought you said dung.
No, do you want to have a sniff? Would you like? Oh, it's disgusting. So my husband hates smelling it, and he swears that he can smell it in the cupboard even though it's nicely concealed. But it smells revolting, but it is actually a digestive aid. Yes, and we use it when we cook lentils. We often use it in the tempering for lentils. You missed the bit where we were talking about the way we eat lentils is very scientific in India, because we soak them, we cook them for ages, we have them with seeds and spices that aid digestion to make it easy for your body to break it down. So this is asafoetida basically. It's also used in vegetable sautés, vegetable curries. We use it with beans. So anything that's slightly difficult. So the flavor it adds is basically like a buttery onion and garlic. So it smells disgusting, but when it hits oil, and you'll see it, we'll use it for the lentil, the tanka. When it hits, are you okay there? Thank you very, very much. We're nearly there. Dal,
Is it completely natural? It's just the sap of the tree?
Yeah, it is the sap of the tree, so it is very natural. And so that. It's one of those magical spices. It's also like slightly awkward, you know, you wouldn't buy it in a supermarket, but I would really recommend you get it. Because, you know, you can put a pinch of it with mustard seeds and cumin seeds and just toss up veg, and that's a sabzi. You know, you're done, that's a veggie stir fry. So, and then you can put it in your tempering for lentils, you can do all sorts.
So you could put it with anything that's indigestible.
Oh, fantastic.
Sorry, you could put it with anything that's indigestible.
Anything.
So if it's got too strong a smell on its own.
You'll see, you'll taste it later. It's got this, it's just buttery onion and garlic, and it's used extensively in Ayurvedic cooking. The only part of India where they use it with meat is in Kashmir. They use asafoetida with their meat curries, and it is magical. Because in Kashmir, well, I don't know whether this is why they do it, but in Kashmir they don't use garlic. It's all ginger based, and ginger doesn't grow in the valley, so they use dry powdered ginger, and they use asafoetida and they use fennel, and they use that with meat, and the results are excellent. Really, in Kashmir, yeah.
Mallika, I've used powdered stuff, but apparently you get resin as well.
You do, but I've always used the powdered version. I mean, really, powdering solid asafoetida is one of the last few things on my list of priorities. Some of you missed the bit where I still consult, but I've had 18 years in the corporate world, and I have 2 kids who are now aged 7.5 and 9, and I still consult. So I'm not a professional chef or cook. This is my big passion, and why I write about Indian food is exactly this. Is to break it down and make people just love doing it at home as much as they love eating it, basically. That's a quick summary. Sorry, I'm just going to give that a little, that's taking a bit forever, isn't it? We may have to eat it one, if that's okay. Who's that? Hello.
So how much of this would you use?
Pinches. It will go in the
that
dal.
much food.
For that much food, maybe 5 pinches. Really, you don't need very much.
1 teaspoon.
Yeah, roughly.
1 teaspoon.
1 teaspoon is about right.
Yeah.
You'll see we'll use it for the dal as well. I might cover the dal or we'll never eat. One second.
What was the ingredient they don't use in Kashmir? You said maybe
They don't
that's
use
why
garlic.
Is that a religious thing?
It is, well, yeah, it is a religious thing. It's also not available. Hello.
I'm so sorry. I've had a terrible journey. I apologise.
Not at all, Sally. Lovely to see you. I have met you before. I remember you from previous events.
I won't shake your hands because I'm cooking.
No, but listen, will you grab a lassi and make yourself comfy? Who are you? Should we get you a drink, Jonathan? Thank you. Oh, really? Okay, well, that's on the fridge and the... So that's asafoetida. The other one I wanted to talk to you about, which is possibly a little less exciting, but meat tenderizer powder. Has everyone come across that? So, you know when you go into Indian restaurants and, yeah, it might be a little, sorry. You go into Indian restaurants and the chicken and the meat it's so soft and you have no idea where it comes from. So basically we use papaya enzyme. You can buy it as meat. These are all the secrets. All the secrets. Where is my meat tenderizer powder? Somewhere. This is I'm opening my disorganized spice cupboard for you all. I just said earlier that I wanted to tidy it and I thought, no, you should see it, warts and all. I hope this is very inspiring. Yeah. Luckily, my ingredients don't fall out. I've managed to master that bit. But I can pass this around as well. It just comes in a little sachet like you would buy a spice. And you have to be careful when you use this because it has salt added to it. So you always use it before you add salt, before you add seasoning generally. Place that. And it is activated by heat. So you don't need to add it too early on to your meats. If you're doing kebabs or, skewers of something or grilled chicken, baked chicken, you basically add it in just a couple of hours before it's cooked, and the heat will activate the ingredient and it gets going.
So not in your marinade, you wouldn't put it in your marinade?
I tend to put it in my marinade, but then I don't marinate stuff for that long. You don't have to. But if I have something shoved in overnight, I'll just add it a couple of hours before. And then season off. Hey, it's sold as meat tenderizer powder.
Did you use it for the beef? Did you use it for the beef?
I didn't because I went to my local butcher Moyens for the beef and I bought very nice, very expensive meat tender steak. Did you get my email? Sorry about that. I thought you deserved it. So we didn't need it, and also steak cooks so quickly. That's pretty much done, isn't it? Yeah, I would. So that's the other one.
How do you use that? Do you just shake it on
and then you shake it on. So it tends to tell you on the back how much you need per grams of meat. So it's about 2 tablespoons for a kilo of meat is plenty. You don't need much.
Leave it for a while before you start.
So as I said, it's heat activated, so you don't really need to add it too early on. You can just, yeah. There's a couple of other ones that I just wanted to draw out. This is a really interesting one, so bear with me. I've got 2 other ingredients that I just really want to pull out because I think they're fascinating, so in India we don't use, at home we don't add color to food. It's just unacceptable, We use turmeric for color rather than flavor. I'll talk about turmeric in more detail later. But there are 2 things you need to know. So turmeric for color, and we use Kashmiri chilies. Have you come across these? So Kashmiri chilies whole, you soak and you grind and you use, and that becomes a wet paste. You can also buy it powdered, and essentially it's like a spicier and deeper shade of red to paprika. So it's about 1 part chili powder to 3 parts paprika is the taste and color of Kashmiri chili powder. This is all in my book, by the way, if you're interested. But this I have in both forms, and it just adds a lovely red color. So you can substitute chili powder for Kashmiri chilies and paprika to just give that red color. And that is a real Indian home trick, basically, because we wouldn't do what they do in restaurants and just add loads of color to food. So that's something to be aware of. You can tell that it's different. I'm going to turn that right down in water, that's going to overcook. You can tell it's different to a red chili because it's fatter and more crinkly. Have a look. You can shove your hand in there. And I'll show you a regular red chili so you know the difference. That's a regular red chili. Yeah? So just fatter. Now on Amazon, I got tricked into buying the wrong chili. I bought Kashmiri chilies on Amazon and they weren't Kashmiri chilies. So, you know, if you're going to buy them, you might as well make sure you're getting the right thing. And just get it from like a Foodco or a Natco or something you trust, you know, because I bought them from somewhere. The packaging looked beautiful, so I bought them and it was completely wrong.
Where's the papaya powder?
So papaya powders, there you go. Yeah, you can give it a little taste as well.
When you eat fresh papaya, does that mean it's sort of tenderising your guts inside?
There's nothing to it, isn't it?
Quite possibly. Yes.
Just similar to
It's a lovely thought. Thank you. So I'll take that away. So that's Kashmiri chili. The other ingredient I really want to pull out is fenugreek, methi. Now methi is one of those incredible plants, right, where we eat fresh methi leaves and we put them in lentils, so we put them in dal. We'll put them into flatbreads and they're a fantastic digestive aid, and actually they're often used with gram flour. And for those of you who weren't here before, gram flour is actually not chickpea flour, it's brown chickpea flour. And it's this, I have it here somewhere, you can see the actual, they're very difficult to digest. So you have to be, this is essentially the basis of gram flour. So methi is often used with it. I have a container of it somewhere, but that's from the shoot, there you go. So that's, you can buy it fresh in bunches from a grocery store, Indian grocery store, or you can buy them fresh frozen, the way you would buy spinach in the freezer section of a supermarket. So I get it from my local Sainsbury's and I always have it in the freezer because it's just so multifunctional. We also use it dried up like this, and have a taste. This kasuri methi, there's a joke that you can smell it from the pores of a Punjabi. Okay. It is the essential ingredient to the creamy Punjabi curries of the northwest. Butter chicken, tandoori chicken. Yeah, they love kasuri methi, and you can literally smell it on a Punjabi man. Okay, but it does it. You just add it crumbled at the end, or you can soak it in hot water and stir it through, depending on your recipe and what's advised. But it does an incredible job of balancing tangy flavors, and it's got this particular, I don't know, like a floral way about it, like quite intense, right?
Fenugreek.
Dense fragrance. It's lovely, isn't it?
That's what
That's fenugreek. Yeah, that's so. Kasuri methi is what it's called.
I found that really hard to find.
It is quite difficult to find. I just get that from a specialist. Again, just buy it online or I have loads if you want to take home some today, Hattie. You're most welcome to my spices, by the way. If there's anything slightly dubious that you'd like to take home, just take it. I've got good enough spices, as you can see. But the other thing about methi is we also use the seeds. So methi seeds are a fermentation aid. And we use them in pickles. We use them in dosa batter. We use them in some curries, not a lot. They're very potent, very, very potent, and they're quite spiky, they're quite bitter. But I'll give you those as well. So, you can just so methi is one of those ingredients that, you know, depending on whether you use the leaf, the fresh leaf, the dried leaf, or the actual seeds, it does very, very interesting things. But you don't need them all at once, and you won't need to buy them all. So yeah, but it's just for you to know. The other one, I spoke about this earlier, carom seeds, ajwain. Ajwain is enjoyed on its own as a digestive. You can pop a little bit in your mouth. It's got a great mouth refresher way about it, a bit like toasted fennel. We use it again as a digestive aid with gram flour. A lot of the gram flour, you know, when you have pakoras, and do you know those gram flour crepes that we make? They're kind of gluten-free crepes that we call them pudla or chilla, depending on where you're from, they often have these in them because again, it's helping you digest your food, right? So it's quite an interesting one, and if you're going to fry your own bhajis or pakoras, I'd really recommend it. I'm going to stop there for a minute. Does anyone have any questions? Would you like, are you fading? Do you need to eat? What's going on?
I've got a question about cooking things like yellow split peas. If you add anything acidic, I've had this problem that if there were any tomatoes, that's it. They did not soften. That was the end of them being softened.
Yes, that's a really good point actually, really good question. You should not, carom, you should not add any ingredients to lentils before they're almost nearly cooked. Because adding something else in the mix just slows down their cookery, and that's especially the case for harder to cook lentils like split yellow lentils or pigeon pea lentils. Whole moong is another one. So you know, moong beans, the yellow lentils, the ones without the skins, super easy to cook. Stick the skin on, you have the husk on, absolute bloody nightmare. But the whole moong lentils are used quite a lot in Punjabi cookery as well. And again, for that, you just don't put anything in until it's very nearly done. And you'll see with the lentil, the dal I'm making, I've added nothing to it. I'm still waiting for it to cook down before. And so what we're doing with the lentils, and I've not been talking about this, but we're adding water bit by bit as and when it dries down to get that thick curry feel to it. So it's almost like a thick.
Really, you add it as it.
Exactly. And the other thing is, you don't want to be able to see any shape in it. You know, the lentils should be cooked and quite loose, but again, that changes from lentil to lentil. So all the curries are different. And in India, there's a lot of snobbery. Like, you know, my mom will go to people's houses and she'll be like, oh, they put that tempering on the wrong dal. You know, it's like there's real set kind of, you can't mix the tempering because everything is done for a reason and there's a method to every madness. But this is just a nice generic lentil to use, which is why I'm doing it. But you do need to make sure that the actual texture of the lentils go. I often go, I go to that detox kitchen place. I go to some of these trendy places for my lunch, and you have these lentil and coconut pots. And I find them fascinating because they're just like little pieces of lentils, and they call it lentil and coconut dal with DHAL, or spelled like a rolled dal. And I'm like, my grandmother is turning in her grave. I don't know what dal this is, but they taste good. But lentil generally, you shouldn't be seeing these chunky pieces of in a dal. You shouldn't be seeing chunky pieces of lentils. Yeah.
So it's usually just the water and the lentils.
Yeah, and actually I could stick some turmeric in there now, I've just remembered. So I'm going to shove in some turmeric. Should we talk about turmeric? It feels like a good moment to talk turmeric. Turmeric's a really interesting one. It's obviously gone completely crazy in this country. Everyone's gone turmeric mad. And I often go on the BBC to talk about why it's absolutely bonkers. Because turmeric, the big ingredient that's in it, the big component, as you know, is curcumin. Yes, I don't know if I'm saying it right. But curcumin is the active ingredient. It is what has lots of health benefits. But as with most things in this world, it's all about dosage and quantity. And depending on the severity of your illness or disease or whatever it is, you could need at least up to something like 45 teaspoons of turmeric for it to actually have a health benefit. So drinking a shot of turmeric and aloe vera is expensive, basically. That's what it is. The other thing that's really interesting about turmeric is, and this is why Indian food, I'm so passionate about this, because everything we do is so scientific. We don't do turmeric shots and turmeric tablets, and that's for good reason. Is because turmeric is very difficult for your body to break down. Your body can't naturally absorb turmeric. So turmeric is best consumed with fat and with black pepper. So actually sticking it in a curry is one of the best ways to consume turmeric.
So see, with these tablets, I don't take them, I'm just...
You're going to tell us, you're going to confess about it.
No, I don't, but I'm going to stay with a really good friend of mine next week who does take them, some very, very expensive ones. Oh my God, so expensive for taking them. So is that complete rubbish?
I would say yes, it is. Although why they're selling in so much quantity is beyond me.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but I can tell you that your body can't absorb it.
So, I mean, would you have a adverse reaction.
You wouldn't have an adverse reaction. You're just basically creating very expensive piss.
Yeah.
Probably quite yellow too. You know, without wishing to be utterly vulgar just before lunch, but you know, it just you can't do anything with it. Your body can't do anything with it. It just doesn't go into your system. So the other way we have turmeric, which is the enormously trendy turmeric milk, which you should know Indian children are tormented with. Like, I have the worst memories about turmeric milk. It was disgusting. It's basically like medication. It tastes revolting. I don't care how much honey and cinnamon and nutmeg you put in it, it is foul. And you know, again, the point of that is you have it with full fat milk. There's the fat in the milk, and you have it with a bit of black pepper. And so that then makes sense because your body absorbs it, it's antibacterial, you know, it's got lots of lovely properties, but you know, how we're consuming it is again very different to, you know, just popping a tablet. I'm sure some of these tablets have ingredients in them that help aid the absorption, but really, you know.
And also prep, they have the coconut one, but coconut milk's quite fatty, isn't it?
So that's okay. Almond milk is good. Yes, I put in almond milk. So there's a drink in India called badam doodh, and it's basically a nut milk. And we give it to couples on their first night. And there's a lovely story behind it because, you know, obviously the Indian wedding, it takes like up to 7 days. And on the first night that the married couple are, you know, spending together, they're knackered. And they're a bit nervous, and everyone is expecting them to, you know, do the needful. And so the couple are given a glass of badam doodh. And the point of that is it's high protein, it's got sugar, so it boosts your, you know, gives you a shot of energy. It also calms you because it's warm milk, you know, and it gets you in the mood because it's got cardamom and nuts and all the things that the Mughal emperors loved, and then, you know, and also obviously all your tittering relatives are very amused by what's going on. So and I did a recipe of that with some turmeric in it because sometimes people do put turmeric in it. But this is all I'm talking about fresh. I'm not talking about fresh turmeric. I'm talking about powdered turmeric, right? Because powdered turmeric it's a bit more muted. By the time they dry it, they powder it, it's a bit more muted. Fresh turmeric is, you know, it's quite pungent. And we don't normally use fresh turmeric to cook with. Some people make spice pastes, fresh pastes out of turmeric, fresh turmeric. But fresh turmeric is used as a beauty aid. So we use it on our skin. And there's a big ritual, in fact, in a lot of communities. On the morning of the wedding day, you bathe the bride in turmeric, in fresh turmeric paste, and then all the relatives take it in turns. They play and they smear it on each other, and it's basically a beauty routine because it's very good for acne, it's a skin clearer, it's a pore cleanser, and so that's basically how we use fresh turmeric.
When I was growing up, the cure-all was cod liver oil.
Yes, yes, it
which
still
everyone
is.
found disgusting.
Yes.
Except, I love this stuff. My mother used to have to hide the bottle.
Did you really? John, I do worry about you sometimes.
I worry about myself all the time.
Yes. So the dal is very nearly done, and you'll see. So I've kept it covered because it's quite a lot of dal, and we do need to eat soon and have a little break. I'm just going to stir this and then show you, right? So can you see what's happened? You can't notice any obvious, you can't see the original texture of the lentils, right? It's very soupy. It could be even thicker, to be honest, up to you guys. We can just keep it going. You can see what happens there. And the water, you know, again, another mistake people make when they're making dal is the water is separate to the lentils. It needs to be incorporated. It needs to feel like a thick soup. You know, in fact, with some of the thicker lentils, we often go in with a potato masher and just mash it up.
Are you going to add some acidity to that? Because I always put a tiny bit of vinegar into my dal just to Eventually, when I season, I do.
Oh, really? Not for this recipe.
Okay.
Oh,
No
that's
need.
something
Why
I've
do you do
tried.
that? What's the logic?
About 50, but
Well,
no idea
I
why.
read somewhere
What's that for?
in a book by Glyn Christian. He said that if your bean
Yeah,
or lentil
exactly.
dish
I
is
just saw it.
disappointing in any way, just add a little bit of
It's just stand up.
red
Oh,
wine vinegar.
well, we've got spices
Oh, yeah,
coming,
exactly.
so Indian lentils never
It
disappoint.
used to be more.
Yeah, you'll be fine for that.
What is that for? Exactly.
They're strong, these consistencies. Have you tried these?
So we're now gonna, I can show you the tempering, which I'm gonna try and do while we're chatting, and this is all, and then that segues nicely onto my next part, which is oils. But now I didn't tell you about coffee grinders. I should probably tell you about that. So I have two spice grinders. One is a spice grinder attachment to a hand blender from Braun, which is a very new gadget that's about to come. In fact, it's just come out, and that's great. Like, it's brilliant because it just attaches onto your hand blender and then you're done. But I also have a removable bowl coffee grinder, like a little one. And what that does is you just push the top down and it grinds so it's like what we call a dry grinder in India, but it's effectively a coffee grinder. But I think the removable bowl is a really important thing because you have to wash it properly. Yes. And I've had spice grinders in the past where the bowl doesn't remove and it's an absolute nightmare. So if you're going to get one of those, now there's again a lot of snobbery about, but you get this special earthy flavor from a pestle and mortar and all this stuff, and I'm like, if I do a blind taste test on you right now and I ask you to guess which spices got ground in a pestle and mortar or in a stone grinder and which ones got done pulverized in a coffee grinder, you would not be able to tell, because we're not talking about delicate flavors here. We're talking about really complex, overpowering flavors and tastes and textures. So, some of this stuff is a little bit redundant. So I'm all for like the ease of gunning for whatever makes things simple for you.
Yeah, it's probably written by men, but when they actually have to do the work.
But also, and everything's at slightly different, levels of toastedness, if that's a word. It's way easy to just shove everything in a coffee grinder and just be happy, like nice and easy. So that's the other thing I was going to tell you about a coffee grinder.
Any
So
particular makes you'd recommend? Because I keep thinking I could buy one and I never get around to it.
So my one is a wall, I think. I bought it ages ago and I haven't looked at it. So this is my one. I'm certain it's a little wall, W-A-H-L. It just goes on top like that. It's got a base, and it's super simple. And then you take everything out and just give it a good wash, So I can check on that for you later. But I would very much recommend it, unless you're buying a brand new hand blender, in which case I definitely go for the Braun one. That's the train station. Vintage steam engine action, oh my goodness. So now we're going to do the tarka and then we'll eat, and I can do papad in the meantime and show you what I'm doing there. That's just for me, by the way, because I feel like I'm losing energy and that never happens. So dal and tempering. So tempering is basically your sizzling spices in hot oil. I am very partial to a bit of ghee in my dal, which obviously means that it's not vegan. But I just think like ghee and lentils has lovely affinity. It's just great. Ghee, I don't make my own ghee for everyday use. I only make ghee for special things, like when I'm doing a biryani, I'll make my own ghee. Presents, I'll make my own ghee. It's very, very common to just buy ghee in India again, but then if, like my family, you had a farm and which had cows in it, and my mom told me the story with like great flourish, I was just like, okay. We had 4 cows and they used to get milked, and my mom would pasteurize the milk and she'd skim off the fat, the cream, and she'd basically just leave it outside for a week. So every week she'd have a fresh batch of skimmed, the skimmed cream. And then by day 7 you fermented the cream, and then they'd cook it on the slow to medium flame until the fat oozes out, the pure fat, and then the milk solids sink to the bottom in little particles. And because it's India, you don't waste anything. The little bits that settle on the bottom are great in flatbread dough. Or my dad used to love it mixed into plain steamed rice, you know, like hot rice with those little crispy bits in it. And then of course you just drain off the top, and that's what liquid gold is, right? Because it's such a pure form of fat. There's a big misconception about ghee, which is that, and I see it in so many cookbooks, which is that you just get a block of butter and you bubble it up. Okay? It is not. So ghee is not clarified butter. Ghee is clarified cultured butter. Okay? The cultured bit is really important. Really important, because it gives ghee that characteristic tang. You know, you get a slightly warm, earthy tone to it. That comes from the culturing. So it's not as simple as just bubbling up some butter and, you know, Bob's your uncle. It's, you know, giving. So I find that actually just buying fresh cream and leaving it to fester until it turns a bit yellow and starts smelling tangy, then you cook it off, brilliant. Who needs cows in your back garden? And I did that while my mum was here, and I trialed with so many creams. I got sour cream because it's already soured, right? But sour cream doesn't have enough fat. You don't get enough ghee out of it. So it's just literally decent quality fresh cream, and off you go.
Do you think it would work with homemade creme fraiche where you'd already soured it? Or would it
I don't think creme fraiche has enough fat. We talked about Greek yogurt earlier as well. I'll repeat that for those of you who weren't here. But so ghee is an interesting one. Ghee has a very interesting health benefit where it actually coats. It's very high in fat, but fat doesn't make you fat, and fat isn't all bad, as we all now know. Ghee actually lines the stomach and makes it easier for your food to digest. So we often have ghee with fatty things, like we deep fry things in ghee. We have ghee with sweets. You know, there's a saying in Hindi, "Tumhare muh mein ghee shakkar." That means, you're talking such lovely things. Ghee and sugar in your mouth. You know, it's like ghee and sugar come out at festive occasions. You know, things like celebrations. You know, if it was that blooming bad for you, we wouldn't be celebrating with this stuff, would we? So, you know, it's like that wine. It's like Christians do a bit of wine and bread, and there's something very auspicious about ghee and also sugar. So ghee has this incredible thing, and for, you know, with India, with all this high fat food and the warm weather, you need as much help as you can get to get the food going, basically. So ghee is often used alongside things like rice and lentils. So that's why I'm going to do a tempering in ghee. And I'm just going to use, and then we'll talk about other oils later. But I just buy like a KTC ghee. There are lots of brands, Plough, but, you know, and I've chatted to the uncle that I buy stuff from in Tooting, and he's just like, look, Plough's a really good one. Just KTC is a really good one. Just use it. That's fine. So I'm happy to do as he says, and it's fine. I also get nice ghee, like when people come from India, I tell them to get me ghee. So I always have a good stash of decent stuff, you know, for smaller quantities. You can share it.
That's everywhere in Tooting. It's very familiar.
What was also said? You said it was badam. What was this? Did you say? The milk.
Badam, B-A-D-A-M.
Oh, A-M.
Yeah. And
Turkish is badam. That's why
Yeah, it is badam.
Oh, Turkish. So it's the only place.
Yeah.
What's the second?
Doodh, D-O-O-D-H.
D-O-O-D-H. Okay, thank you.
Mallika, how long does it how long does it keep for?
Oh, ages. Like, although it says like 6 months or something ridiculous, it's just fat.
Yeah.
So even when
Pure
it's
fat.
open, you can just keep it.
Oh yeah.
Do you keep it in the fridge?
No. Because then it goes really solid. I mean, it's pretty solid in here as well, but it's quite hard to scoop out and stuff. Yeah, pass it around. And shall I dip some into my dish? Yeah, quickly, and then I'll pass it around. So I'm gonna go, you know, I'm gonna go quite wild, I reckon, with this thing. It tastes really good, and also, you know, you can't be on diets and stuff to know. So.
This is for your tempering, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So I've got a decent quantity now. You can just scoop it in whatever quantity you want. Like, I've just used it in its semi-solid form. Even when it's solid, it's not a problem. So there you go, you pass that around for when you're ready. So tempering, I said this earlier, you literally just have to wait for the spices to sizzle, right? So let's do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, that should do me. 14, let's go crazy. I'm going really crazy with this tempering. And then we use some cumin. You'll see in a minute. And we use the hing, so you can see how all of it comes together. Where is the asafoetida? Has anyone got it?
That was doing the rounds. There it is.
Yeah?
What's that thing?
Ah, perfect. So we open all this stuff out. And then... Now, I'm not using any fresh herbs. You can, so there's a recipe in my book for this lentil, but what I've done is you can use this tempering or just switch the tempering. So the big thing about dal is you saw how long that took to cook. That's a lot of lentils, but normally to serve 4, you're looking at 20 minutes to half an hour, right? So my big tip is make extra lentils, box up half of it, shove it in the freezer when it's cold. Yes, so then next time you want dal, the tempering will take seconds.
Yes.
Right? So you've got your stash of dal ready. So, and that's especially true for some of the harder to boil lentils. You know, you want as much of that sort of ready stored away as you can deal with. But actually, I'll show you my freezer as well. Another not so organized part of this kitchen, but you know, hopefully you'll enjoy. So first you get all your ingredients out as per usual. You're warming up your ghee. That's coming along well. Yes, let's take the lid off that. Sorry, just put that in there. Let's give it a little stir. Okay, and we'll wait for the ghee to melt. And we should probably add some salt, but nobody look when I add salt to this.
Yes, please. The salt police will be out.
The salt police will be out. I mean, you can't have lentils without salt. That's really...
I think in the hot weather your body craves the salt.
Right,
Actually, like yesterday, I
totally.
just fancied eating something really salty, like Middle Eastern feta or something. You know.
Right.
I'm really interested to see how much salt you add.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Good grief. So I didn't put, mostly I avoided putting salt measures in my book because I just thought, you know what, the salt police are coming right after me. So that's your ghee melted. So first things first, you go in with the hing, okay, because that has to melt. So I'm going to put in that's about 8 pinches. Let's say a teaspoon for easy measure. So that then goes in. Yeah. As it sizzles, we go in with, let's do the cumin. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I've done quantities of 4 with that, yes. So that's why I just need a little. Yeah. So you hear it crackling. Yeah. Can you hear it? Yeah. It's quite. Then you go in with your chilies. Can you smell the butter? It's like the combination of.
Smell the hing.
Yeah, you can smell the hing, can't you? I love hing. It's like my ghee and hing is basically love. So when my sister comes to it. I've been trying and failing to teach her how to cook for years. But when she comes in and she says, "Oh, it tastes of home," and that's one of the nicest compliments, you know. Like so. And then I'm going to go in with the chili powder. The reason I'm doing the chili powder at the end because it's ground, so it's partially cooked. We don't want it to burn. I'm going to go in with that and. Maybe a little bit more. I'm not going to make this too spicy because if there's any left, my kids will eat it. And then you're done. And then this is what you do with it. So it's kind of ready, right? Everything's sizzling, spices have gone in. After the red chilies go in, you don't leave it for too long because it'll just burn. And then you pour it into your dal. So I've got my hot dal here that's cooked. You can see it's even more reduced. Yeah. You've got a nice thick lentil because you know it's a recipe for a thick tadka dal. So you pour that in. You see what happens. Yeah. And it takes seconds, which is why it makes so much sense to have this ready, the dal ready boiled in your freezer. But then this is my granny's trick. You pop a bit of dal back in there, and then you pour it back in.
So is there any vegan alternative at all? Coconut?
You can use coconut, you can use vegetable oil. Vegetable oil is fine, it's not a problem at all.
It still tastes. What would you use?
It
Vegetable
tastes
or
really
coconut?
good. I'd use vegetable because coconut has a very strong flavor profile. Unless a lentil asks for coconut. So I am not buying into any fads. Until coconut is proved to be the elixir for immortal youth, I am not putting it into everything. Sorry. There's a time and a place. It's a bit like putting olive oil in everything, you know? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Would you make pasta in coconut oil? So why would I cook Indian food in olive oil? It's ridiculous.
It's called marketing, really.
Right.
These things suddenly become truth just because if enough people say it.
Totally. Hey, you're telling me it's my day job. That's what I do.
It becomes truth, you know, if enough people repeat it.
But it's nonsense, and
It's
also
nonsense.
it's total nonsense. And the other thing about it is that you know you have to be really careful because you will change the taste completely if you put coconut oil in like a regular dish, unless you don't mind. So salt.
Look away.
Don't make it too
Don't
so.
hold back.
Hey,
Hold back.
don't hold back. I might need to taste it in a minute. So I do eat a lot of salt. That's one of my big problems among many things. So let's give this a little taste. We'll see that that's all right. More. I told you not to look. It's a bit spicy. I hope you guys can eat chilies, yes? We go to chilies. I didn't even bother checking. I didn't check how many vegetarians we were, how much chili anyone can eat, whether there were any special dietary restrictions. Sorry, guys. I know this needs a bit more. It's lentil. Lentil tastes of nothing.
This
Without
is
the
really
spice.
poor man's food, isn't it? I mean, the tempering, in a way, adds flavour to something that feeds people cheaply.
Yeah.
Like in, I don't know, Ethiopia or wherever.
That's
you know.
right. And it's very much the way.
These pulses with a lot of spices.
That's right. And that's why the food we eat is mostly veggie. Perfect. I love my own cooking the most. It's so embarrassing. My husband's like, you should tone it down, you know. Like, this is a little bit embarrassing, but so we're gonna eat. Woohoo! Let me tell you what all this is, and it's hot enough. Yeah, that's definitely hot enough.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Hold it. Yeah.
Like that?
So I'll quickly tell you what we're eating. So we're having sag paneer. Everyone knows sag paneer. The sag paneer I make is an any green sag paneer. 300 grams of any leafy greens will give you this sag paneer. I've done it with beet greens, chard, kale, shredded greens, like just regular shredded greens. That one has black kale, spinach, and and just spring greens sliced up from bags. So there was no chopping, slicing, nothing. Just pop those in. And then paneer, I always buy ready-made unless I have a massive quantity of milk that needs to be set into paneer. Store-bought paneer is fine, absolutely fine. The fresh stuff is better if you're making breakfast out of it, like if you're doing scrambled paneer or, you know, where it's like a light dish, like a lightweight recipe, then I would go for fresh paneer. It's not too cumbersome. It's just, again, in my list of priorities, making my own paneer features quite low. It's just one of those things. But I have no issue with people doing it because it's a great way to use up leftover milk. That's ready paneer. I always pre-cook my paneer before putting it in anything because it seals the paneer, stops it from turning into crumbs. Yes. Paneer, when it's cold, has the texture of polystyrene. Not that I eat polystyrene, but it's very rubbery, it's quite plasticky, so you want to warm it up. I have seen in cookbooks, Indian cookbooks, that you soak cooked paneer in water before you add it to a dish. Do not ever do that. I have 2 words for you, in fact, well, 2 words. Make up sponge. When the sponge is wet, it doesn't absorb, okay? Paneer, same thing. Wet paneer, basically paneer that's stuffed with water, with moisture, cannot accept spices. Don't ever soak paneer before putting it in anything. Seal it up, pop it in. Let it soak the good stuff, which is your curry, right? Makes sense. It's basic science.
Do you have a trick for keeping it so nice and green and not kind of
Yes, I do. I do have a trick for that. When you cook your greens, you add salt to them when you're cooking them, and you cook them uncovered. That is your trick.
But even once you covered it, it stayed green.
Because I've cooked it with salt.
Right.
And when I cooked down the greens, I put salt and I cooked it uncovered.
Okay.
Then you blend it and the colour
Now
stays.
you're just keeping it, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you use any spices or anything in there?
I do indeed. So again, the recipe here is deadly simple. The recipe here involves you basically fry off onion, ginger, garlic together. You pop some whole cumin in it and some green chilies. Bit of turmeric, bit of chili powder. So quite basic spices, right? Like turmeric, chili powder, cumin seeds, all the stuff that we know and we love. And then what I do is I pop in the bags of greens, and then you basically put it in the Vitamix. I just blend it like a smoothie. And what my Vitamix I use for everything. So again, the words you'll hear in your older cookbooks are dry grinder, wet grinder. Basically, a wet grinder is a smoothie maker, okay? It's a high-speed blender that pulverizes, and I use it for absolutely everything. I made the spinach mix in there, I made the smoothie in there, although not at the same time, obviously. There was one other thing I did in there before, I can't remember now. But, I made the batter for the dosa in there as well. But I use my Vitamix almost daily for everything. I've also used a Nutri Ninja in kitchen studios, that like a Nutri Bullet, Nutri something. You're looking at basically 1,000 watts as a minimum to get the kind of smooth mixture that you need. So sometimes people will complain, they'll be like, oh, I can't get it to be really smooth like in your recipe. That's because they're using a Magimix. A Magimix isn't high enough speed. It's also a different shaped bowl. So you're never going to get something super smooth in there. It's better for mixing, fish cake batter or kebab mixes, or it's better for that sort of thing. For a really well blended smoothie or well blended batter, you want to use a hand blender or you want to use a Vitamix.
Did you Vitamix it when you cooked it lightly, or did you sort of puree it first and then add it?
You cook the greens down,
right, so
and then you shove it in the Vitamix.
Yeah.
And you wait for it to cool a little bit, because otherwise, it's a bit too hot to handle.
Yeah.
And so yes, so shall we eat? Let's get some plates going. Who can I give the plates to? How many are we? Martha didn't come, did she? Martha didn't make it. Oh, that's a shame. Yes, so how many are we then? Everyone but? And you will eat, yes. Don't leave me with all this food, please, whatever you do. So let's get these. There you go. How is that?
I know somebody who did that. They had 2 sockets in this.
This is much rummier than expected.
There might be some in the dishwasher as well. And then cut too many. Yes. This is beetroot raita, which thank you very much. Which I love making, because the big secret is it's basically supermarket beetroot salad. Mixed into yogurt, full fat yogurt, and then the spices on it. There's chaat masala, which is one I make at home. It's like a mix of roasted ground cumin and other things. The 2 spices on here that's very interesting. One is actually one spice that's very interesting. Chaat masala is one of them. The other one is kala namak, or black salt. I don't know if you've come across it. Black salt is a very highly mineralized salt, a bit like a Himalayan salt, but not quite. And it has incredible affinity with yogurt and with eggs. So we use it a lot. And when you have salty lassi, when you have the savory version, we put it in that too.
Like salt, so I can buy that in Tooting, probably.
You can buy that in Tooting, and it's lovely. I can show you. You can have a little taste of it and see what it looks like. But when you put it on, it's like a grey, pinky grey, and it goes on, and it just you can see bits of it still. So yes, help yourselves.
What was the other spice in this?
So chaat masala. Chaat masala.
What's that?
So chaat masala is basically, it's got cumin, it's got a bit of coriander, it's got a bit of chili powder, and you toast the ingredients and then grind them up. And amchur is the other one, which is the slightly tangy mango powder.
So you said supermarket beetroot salad. Is that the one in vinegar?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you wouldn't put vinegar in yogurt normally, would you? Well, in India you would. Clashing textures, you see it.
Vinegar in yogurt. Yes.
Cheers. Thank you. Please help yourselves and eat with ghee abandon. You must. Tissues here, napkins here.
Yeah.